Hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Route 1 Rundown. If you eat, sleep, and breathe Maryland basketball, then this is the place for you. I'm your host, Steve Gorgie, and I'm thrilled to be back for another episode to talk some Terps, especially as they come off a 101-75 thrashing of Iowa on a Sunday afternoon, and the Terps moved to 20-6 overall, 10-5 in Big Ten play with 5 regular season games to go. It's going to be a really fun rest of February and March here, so I'm excited to dive into all of that. But first, a reminder that if you're listening to the show, you want to be watching it, you got to go to youtube.com/Department of Hoops, because this show is part of the Department of Hoops, a DMV media network. It's a great place if you love local basketball talk, talking Wizards, talking Terps, talking mid-major hoops. It's all there, so make sure you go and check it out. But let's get into that Iowa game, because like I said, it was a thrashing 101-75, but it didn't always feel that way. The first half was, let's just put it bluntly, it was lackluster. Maryland came out scorching hot on the offensive end to start the game, 7 of 7 to start that basketball game. But defensively, Maryland gives up 51 points in the first half to a very good, very fast-paced Iowa offense. And they were trailing 51-47 at half. And I think in that first half, a lot of it had to do with, it felt like they were a little bit unprepared for what they were going to see against this Iowa team. I know Kevin Willard talked in the postgame about the difficulties of playing on the road late on a Thursday night, coming back, he said they got back at like 5 in the morning on Friday morning, so that day was kind of a wash for them, a little bit of fatigue there. But part of it was they looked like they were not prepared for the way that Iowa moves the basketball, because for all of Iowa's faults, they are a very good cutting, very good passing, very good offensive team, as they always are under Fran McCaffery. Where Iowa often struggles is on the defensive end. And that did show, too, in the first half, where Maryland was able to score 47, but Maryland turned the ball over a lot. That was, to me, the inability to stop those backdoor cuts by Iowa and the turnovers in the first half, and they had 11 first-half turnovers. That was really the issue in the first half, and why Maryland found itself down 51-47 at halftime. Well, you can forget about all that, because that's not what anybody's talking about today. Everybody is talking about that 54-24 blowout of a second half that gave Maryland a beatdown of Iowa. When you look back, when you think back at this game, that's what's going to be in your memory. That's what's in my memory. At halftime, I was disappointed in the first half. I was like, this is a lackluster performance against an Iowa team that I really thought they should pound, given their lack of a big man with Owen Freeman out, given the style of play that they play, where like they are just not a good defensive team. They struggle to get stops, especially on the road. And at halftime of that game, I thought it was lackluster. Well, that all completely went by the wayside, because Maryland brought its A game in the second half. They switched to a little bit of a zone defense at times. They did not allow Iowa to hit a single three-pointer in the second half of that ball game. Iowa was 0 of 13 from beyond the arc in the second half, and Maryland was absolutely on fire. Maryland shot nearly 60% from the floor in the second half, and for the second game in a row and 5th time this season, all 5 Maryland starters hit double figures. And now Maryland's starting 5 is now the highest scoring starting 5 in the entire country. This starting 5 is elite. So I think when I think about this game, my main takeaway is the gear that Maryland showed that they can get themselves into in the second half of that game. 54-24. They outscore Iowa by 30 points, and it felt like they couldn't miss. It felt like they were crisp. It felt like they were getting easy buckets, and it felt like they had stepped the defensive intensity way, way up. They were much better at defending those back cuts. There was a few times where they were actually looking for it and able to generate a steal off it that led to a good look on the other end. And that second half, I think, showed what Maryland is capable of. Why so many people are so positive, are so confident in what this Maryland team can do in the postseason. It's because you see a team that maybe doesn't play its best half of the season, doesn't play its best 20 minutes by any means, and they get it together at halftime and they find a new gear. And that's what really, really good teams do. And I think Maryland is starting to show that they are a really, really good team. I think Maryland is starting to show that they're very clearly in that top tier of Big Ten teams there. So from that perspective, I thought this was just when you think about this game, when you look back on this game, it was, hey, we can take it to another level. Basketball teams aren't always going to play perfect for all 40 minutes, and Maryland didn't play perfect in the first half of that game. But when they were down, when they got a little bit of a gut check, they were able to get it together, and they were able to step it up, and they were able to drop 54 on Iowa while holding them under 25 points and a half, and they end up walking away with a blowout victory. And before I get into some of the other specifics from this game and some of the performances, the other big takeaway for me coming out of this game was it felt like a moment where the national perception of Maryland changed a little bit, because I was seeing it on social media after the game from people who pay attention to college basketball, who cover the sport nationally, from fans who are maybe not Maryland fans or maybe not Big Ten fans, but are watching this game with the football season now in the rearview mirror and everybody kind of starting to turn their attention towards March Madness and towards college basketball. You started to see a lot of, whoa, Maryland's really good. Wow, this Maryland team's legit. Man, I think I might pick this Maryland team to make a run in the tournament. And I think that's a big deal for a Maryland program right now that is, I feel like, struggling to generate a lot of momentum, struggling to generate a lot of headlines. They've been kind of at the bottom end of that top 25. But if you're listening to the show, if you're like me, you've seen it all year. You've seen how good Derek Queen is. You've seen how good Julian Reese is. The starting five is Jacoby Gillespie, Rodney Rice, Selton Miguel. What this team can do from a scoring perspective. How can they just go boom on these 10-0 runs real quick where it feels like they can't miss from the outside. But I felt like yesterday there started to be a little bit more attention nationally on this team. And so why does that matter? Why does that even matter at all? Well, by and large, this is a perception-based sport. Any sport where you have a selection committee determining who plays for the championship and how they're seated, I think perception really does matter. For one, that's one of the reasons why I think it really does matter. And you've seen it even with some of the bracketologies, like the CBS Sports bracketologist Jerry Palm. He's been doing this forever, but I haven't seen an updated one from him today on Monday, but late last week he had Maryland as an 8 seed. Now, I think part of that has to do with Maryland's really, frankly, poor non-conference strength of schedule, but I think some of these bracketology seedings might have a little bit to do with the perception of Maryland, that Maryland isn't this juggernaut team. They haven't been a juggernaut program over the past 5 years or so. I think there is still some national skepticism, and I can't get into Jerry Palm's head. I don't know why he's seeding Maryland as an 8 seed or I haven't seen any reasoning or logic as to why he has them there, where I think Maryland at this moment is more like a 5 or 6 seed when you compare their resumes. I would imagine, though, it has a large part to do with that non-conference strength of schedule. I imagine to some extent, because this is just human nature, I imagine that a program like Maryland that has not been at the top of the sport is going to struggle a little bit more to get some of that national respect, to get some of that national excitement. But I felt like yesterday was a moment where you just look up, whether you're watching the game or you see it on your phone, you see the final score, and you're like, whoa, Maryland put up 101? 101 points in a Big Ten game? And I get it, Iowa plays fast, Maryland plays fast, but to see a Maryland team put up 101 points in a Big Ten game, I think that really can generate buzz, generate attention, especially now that the football season is over. So, I'm not here to say that the selection committee operates solely off vibes, or these bracketologists operate solely off vibes. What I'm here to say is that anytime you are involving humans in making a selection decision, those things are going to matter. They might matter just a little bit, but they are going to matter to some extent. And I think it's much more impressive. You can even compare it to some of those years, like the Melo Trimble years, where Maryland was winning a lot of close games. Constantly, Melo Trimble had to hit a buzzer beater in the last minute, or had to make a big shot, get to the free throw line in the last minute of a game, right? And I think there was a perception of Maryland at times, like, okay, well, they're good, but they're playing all these close games. And I think that stuff really and truly does matter. We have a million metrics on these team sheets. You know, we have KenPom and BPI and T rank and KPI and strength of record and wins above bubble and the net ranking. But at the end of the day, these are humans making decision. And I think when you see a visually impressive performance from a team, where they can put up 101 points, where they can be down at halftime, go on a tear, and rip your heart out, I think that leaves a lasting impression. And that's why that really is important. That's why visually impressive performances like that win over Iowa matter in the long run. And the other thing, and this will always be true with college basketball and college sports in general, regardless of this changing landscape with NIL and the transfer portal, is that good players want to play for good programs. Good players want to go where they can win and they can get to the next level. And I think what you're seeing with Maryland right now is it's a place where you can win. Derek Queen, he's going to be a first-round NBA draft pick in the summer. That's a great thing for Maryland. That's a great thing for the program. That's a great thing for attracting the next Derek Queen. So I think it's a good thing in that regard, too. That's why perception matters. That's why it matters to have that little number 20 whatever next to your name, number 17 next to your name. That's why that matters, and that's why a win like yesterday matters. So I thought yesterday was a really big deal for just changing the national narrative around Maryland a little bit, changing the perception and generating some buzz around this Maryland basketball program. Now, back to some of the specifics of the game, the nitty-gritty of this game. It's a game where you look back at it and you're not like, there's been games this year where you're like, oh, that was the Derek Queen game. The Rutgers, that was the Derek Queen game. There's games where like, that was the Jacoby Gillespie game, the Rodney Rice game, the Selton Miguel game. These last two games, it's just been an everybody game. It's been each and every one of these guys in the starting five doing what they do best. And Kevin Willard talked about it a little bit after the game, and I would love to play the soundbite, but I don't have it right now, unfortunately. But he talked about the fact that it took some growing. It took some time. But these guys now are all comfortable with each other, and they're comfortable with the way they all play. They know that if somebody else is shooting the ball, that's all right. They're going to get their touch at some point. And you look at it, you look at the shot distribution yesterday. I'll just go in order here. Jacoby Gillespie, an unbelievable 11 of 14. He leads the way with 14 shots. Selton Miguel, also co-leader with 14 shots. He was 6 of 14. Rodney Rice, 12 shots. Julian Reese, 9 shots. Derek Queen, 9 shots. The distribution there is really unbelievably even. And it's a team that just seems like it's playing in a really confident way right now. It's a team that seems like it trusts one another. And like Willard said, they know that at some point, okay, Selton Miguel's hot right now. Let him cook. I'm going to get my shots at some point. And so Miguel was hot yesterday. 5 of 9 from beyond the arc. And the guy is continuing to show game in and game out that he really is somebody. It's a cliche in basketball. He can shoot from anywhere. Selton Miguel can shoot from anywhere. There's not many bad shots on the court for him. And sometimes, the shot selection can be questionable. You can be watching it. I mean, he's the ultimate no, yes player, because there are so many times where Selton Miguel goes to take a shot. You're like, no, don't take that. And then all of a sudden doesn't even touch the net. That's what a good shooter he is. But he goes 5 of 9 from beyond the arc. But the distribution of those shots, it's just unbelievably even. And the scoring, unbelievably even as well. 26 for Gillespie, 18 for Rice, 18 for Queen, 17 for Miguel, 16 for Julian Reese. And that right there, what you've seen the last 2 games from this Maryland offense, is why this team can make a run. And I said it on the last episode, and I put out videos on social about it. But if this team is going to make a run in March, it's because of the balance of this offense. It's because they are so versatile. It's because you cannot take away Maryland's offense by taking away one guy. And I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday, and that felt like one of the issues over the years in the Mark Turgeon era. Is Maryland had these really, really good guards, always. Melo Trimble, Anthony Cowan. They're 2 of the all-time greats, really, in Maryland history, and certainly over the past 10 years. I want to have a discussion over the summer. It's a really fascinating discussion to me because the last honored jersey in the rafters right now at Xfinity Center is Gravis Vasquez, who finished up in 2010. I think both Cowan and Trimble deserve a place in the rafters. The question is who goes in first. So interesting conversation. Let's put a pin in that one when it's off season and we have a lot more time to talk about things like that. But point being, we had those 2 guys. Maryland had those 2 guys in College Park, and they were the drivers. They were the engines of that team. And in many years, there was some really good, even NBA level pieces around those guys. Jalen Smith, Bruno Fernando, Kevin Herter. Those were all guys who would go on to play. Aaron Wiggins. They'd all go on to play in the NBA. But for years and years, it felt like Maryland's offense was a little lackluster because it was so reliant on that one lead guard. It felt like if you could shut down Melo Trimble, you were going to beat Maryland. If you could shut down Anthony Cowan, you were going to beat Maryland. And I do not feel that way at all about this Maryland team. I don't feel that way at all about Jacoby Gillespie. Now, you need Jacoby Gillespie on the court, absolutely, because I think the offense runs completely differently when Jacoby Gillespie is on the court. It's critical to have him on the court running the offense. But if for some reason Jacoby Gillespie was not having his best shooting day, you can count on Rodney Rice to pick up the slack. You can count on Derek Queen and Julian Reese to have big games inside, and that goes for really anybody. So I think that's a big difference from what I see of Maryland teams in years past. And really, like I've said, I think this is the best team, certainly since 2020, and the team that never got a chance to play in the NCAA tournament, but maybe since 2010, and the team that went out to Michigan State in the second round in Gravis Vasquez's senior year. I think this team has more even scoring than either of those teams, to be honest. And it might be close with the 2010 team, because that team did have some good scoring with a senior and Eric Hayes alongside Vasquez in the backcourt. Landon Milbourne could score. Jordan Williams as a freshman was a good scorer, but I don't see anybody, certainly nobody on that team in the front court was nearly as talented as Derek Queen. Nobody as experienced as Julian Reese. If you ask me to, like, if we're drafting teams, yeah, Gravis Vasquez for sure is going to be my first pick in that draft, but Derek Queen would probably be second in that draft. Well, I don't know who did, or maybe it's Julian Reese. It's hard. Either way, I think this team has a more balanced scoring approach and more weapons than any Maryland team we've seen in a really long time. I think I'd honestly have to go back to like the 2007 season, and that was the year Maryland lost to Butler in a second-round NCAA tournament game. I want to bring up that team right now because that was a really good offensive team. I'm sorry, the 2006, 2007. I'm getting my years confused here. The 2007 team. Okay, maybe I'm remembering it wrong here because I remember that team being a very potent offensive team. Ken Pom does not agree. Ken Pom had them as the number 53 offense in the country that year, the number 12 team overall, but number 53 offense in the country. Ken Pom has them as a defensively driven team that season with the number 7 defense. I remember that team being very potent offensively. Clearly, I'm misremembering it to time a little bit. And looking at that roster, it was a freshman Grievous Vasquez running the point. Then you had DJ Strawberry, Mike Jones, James Gist, Kenny Abekwe. You know what? Looking back at it, that doesn't seem like an offense that even comes close to this year's Maryland offense. I think you have to go back a very, very far way to find an offense that's as good and as versatile as this one. And that's not to sell the 2020 team short. Like, I feel like I do that sometimes when I've been talking about this team, where I sell that 2020 team short, because that was a very good basketball team. They were number 11 in KenPom. They were number 18 in adjusted offensive efficiency, number 22 in adjusted defensive efficiency. But I just don't feel like it was as even as this team is. I just don't feel like there were as many weapons as this team had. It was a senior Anthony Cowan, who, again, I think is one of the greats in Maryland history, but he was not ever the outside shooter that Jacoby Gillespie was. It was a sophomore Jalen Smith, who was excellent and probably compares favorably to a freshman Derek Queen. That would be an interesting comparison right now. Let's look at that real quick. So Jalen Smith that season had an 120.1 offensive rating on KenPom, and obviously this is just going to take into account really offense. Derek Queen right now, 115.8 offensive rating. Derek Queen just under 59% from inside the arc. Jalen Smith about 60% from inside the arc. So I think that's a pretty fair comparison for those two guys. But I think where the difference comes is, look at the rest of the starting five there. Aaron Wiggins, Eric Ayala, Daryl Morsell. Wiggins and Ayala both sophomores. Morsell, a junior that season. I think at this moment, I don't know how I couldn't take Julian Reese, Rodney Rice, and Selton Miguel as the other three. So a very good team Maryland had in 2020, no doubt about it. I just think that the balance that we see and the firepower that we see on this team is better than any we've seen at Maryland in a long time. A huge difference between this team and the 2020 team, and I mentioned it with Anthony Cowan's outside shooting, is that Maryland team in 2020 was not a great three-point shooting team. They shot just 31.1% from beyond the arc. This year's Maryland team shooting 37.5%, number 30 in the country in three-point shooting. And it's not that they're so overly reliant on three-point shooting. In fact, they're just 266 nationally in three-point shooting rate. And that's one of the things that I really like about this team. It's that they can shoot, but they are not overly reliant on shooting. It's not like some of the Alabama teams we've seen under Nate Oates, where it's like they can put up 30, they can make 33s on you, but there's going to be a night where they go cold, and they are not going to win when they go cold. Maryland is versatile enough that they can survive a bad three-point shooting night. That if the bigs, one of the bigs isn't scoring, gets into a little foul trouble, they can survive it. And that's just what I think makes this Maryland team really, really special at this moment. So let's look ahead a little bit here, because 5 games left in the regular season and things are really tight at the top of the Big Ten standings right now. It was a big weekend for Michigan, who is now sitting at 12-2 in sole possession of first place in the conference. Michigan State, a game back of them at 11-3, and both those teams will square off twice. They'll play each other twice over the last, they each have 6 games left in the season. So that could very well decide the conference title right there. Purdue takes a big loss to Wisconsin at home. Wisconsin, talk about a great second half. Wisconsin had a great second half in that game. Purdue's at 11-4. Wisconsin's at 10-4. That rounds out your top 4 right there. And now Maryland and UCLA tied at 10-5 for 5th place. It's going to be a battle. It is going to be a battle the rest of the way. And my expectation for Maryland now the rest of the way, I want to revise it a little bit, because after the Nebraska game, I said that 6 games left, I think like 4-2 is my minimum expectation. I was really thinking about it after I did that episode, after I recorded that, and I think I undershot it. And at this point, with 5 games left, it's not like that Iowa game made me feel differently, really, because what we saw in that Iowa game is what you and I and everybody who is watching this team closely has known Maryland is capable of really all season long. So it's not like that Iowa game made me feel differently, but it's just looking at the remainder of the schedule and thinking about what this team is. And you look at what they have. It's USC at home, it's Michigan State at home, it's Penn State on the road, the single worst team in the conference right now. Michigan on the road, the best team, at least by standings, in the conference right now. And then Northwestern at home, a banged up Northwestern team who Maryland, yes, did lose to on the road, but it's a Northwestern team without Brooks Barnheiser, who absolutely torched the Terps in Evanston. So you look at those 5 games, 3 at home, 2 on the road. To me, it has to be 4-1. It has to be 4-1. That's my new expectation for this team, is that this team goes into the Big Ten tournament at 14-6 in the conference or better. And remember, 14-6 would tie that 2020 team. That would tie that team, and that would tie Maryland's best ever record in a 20-game Big Ten schedule at 14-6. So that's really what I'm looking at for Maryland. That's my expectation for Maryland at this point, is to go 14-6, is to finish this season out incredibly strong, get a it's really, you got to beat USC, you got to beat Penn State, you got to beat Northwestern, and then you split the games against the 2 Michigan schools. The Michigan State game's at home. I think that's certainly the far more likely one to win. But the Michigan game's going to be interesting because Michigan, like Maryland, has 2 really good bigs. And I think that's going to be an unbelievable battle inside between Vlad Golden, Danny Wolf, Julian Reese, and Derek Queen. So I think that's going to be a really fun one. And look, if Maryland does win out, if Maryland can go 5-0, finish 15-5, there's an outside shot they could win a share of the Big Ten title. I'm not saying it's likely, but look, Michigan 12-2, 6 games left. They'd have to go 3-3 the rest of the way. Is it possible they could get swept by Michigan State, lose to Maryland, and they finish at 15-5? Definitely. Now, I don't know if that's the best thing for Maryland if Maryland wants to win a share of the title, because Michigan State's going to need to lose 2 games as well. You look at Michigan State's schedule, they have Purdue on Tuesday at home. They have a tough schedule here. Purdue at home, Michigan and Maryland on the road in back-to-back games, Wisconsin at home, Iowa on the road, Michigan at home. So, I think if it's possible. Like, there's so many scenarios that could play out right now, but if Maryland can win out, can get to 15-5, regardless of what happens above them, that would be an unbelievable accomplishment. That would be the best ever Maryland record in a 20-game Big Ten conference schedule at 15-5. But 4-1, finishing 14-6 is my expectation right now. And the way Ken Pom has it projected at the moment, he has Michigan finishing at 16-4, winning the league, Michigan State, Purdue, and Wisconsin all at 14-6, and then Maryland and UCLA finishing at 13-7. 14-6 would be good enough for a share of second place in the Big Ten and would be a really nice capper to a good regular season for this Maryland team and set them up really nicely to make a run in the Big Ten tournament and make a run in the Big Dance. So that's kind of what the road ahead looks like for the Terps. The other last thing I wanted to talk about here was on Saturday, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee came out with their top 16 seats. And that list in order was Auburn number 1, Duke number 2. Auburn number 1, Alabama number 2, Duke number 3, Florida number 4, Tennessee number 5, Texas A&M at 6, Purdue at 7, Houston at 8, Iowa State at 9, Kentucky at 10, Wisconsin at 11, Arizona at 12, Texas Tech at 13, Michigan at 14, Kansas at 15, St. John's in 16. And the team I really want to highlight here is Texas Tech at number 13, because that's the team I was watching for to give some indication, some idea of where Maryland could end up or how the committee might think about Maryland, because Texas Tech and Maryland have a lot of things in common. Texas Tech right now is just a slightly better version of Maryland. And when I say that, what I mean is this. Texas Tech is number 7 in the net at the moment. Maryland's number 14 in the net. But what's very similar about these teams is that if there's a question mark about them, it's the non-conference strength of schedule. So Texas Tech has the number 295 non-conference strength of schedule by net. Maryland has the number 328 non-conference strength of schedule by net. When you look at on the team sheets that the committee looks at, there's two types of metrics. There's results-based metrics and there's predictive metrics. So the results-based metrics are KPI, strength of record, wins above bubble, which is a new one. The predictive metrics are BPI, KenPom, and T-rank. And kind of the difference, in my understanding, the difference between those metrics is, well, predictive metrics are going to predict how you might do going forward, while results-based metrics simply rank you based on the results. And really, like in practice, what that means, though, is predictive metrics incorporate much more heavily, and I'm not sure if the results-based metrics do or do not incorporate strength, margin of victory, but the results-based metrics absolutely do. They value a win like that over Iowa significantly because Maryland blew them out and exceeded expectations, and that means Maryland is more likely to do something like that going forward. I mean, that's really simple layman's terms, but basically predictive metrics take into account how you played, and results-based metrics take into account who you beat and who you lost to put it kind of very, very simply there. And there might be some sort of margin of victory in some of those result-based metrics, but if there is, it's not weighted nearly as heavily as the predictive metrics are. So Texas Tech outperforms their predictive metrics outperform their results-based metrics. So their results-based metrics, there's kind of a wide variety there, but they're number 25 in KPI, they're number 12 in strength of record. Well, their predictive metrics, they're number 7 in T-rank, number 7 in KenPom, number 9 in BPI. And when you compare that to Maryland's, it's really similar because Maryland also outperforms the results-based metrics with the predictive metrics. So for Maryland, their strength of record's number 21, their KPI is number 28, but the predictive metrics are 14 in T-rank, 14 in KenPom, and number 15 in BPI. So I felt like going into this weekend, Maryland's definitely not going to be a top 16 seed, or a top 16 team, although I think it's a little closer than a lot of people were giving it credit for, but Texas Tech might be a good indicator because if the committee can view Texas Tech's resume favorably, and one thing I forgot to mention here in regard to the similar profiles here, you look at the quad 1 wins. Maryland 6-5 in quad 1 games, 3-1 in quad 2 games. Texas Tech 7-3 in quad 1 games, 2-2 in quad 2 games. So it's a little better. They're a little better in the quad 1 department, 7-3 versus 6-5, but it's not drastically different. But I kind of viewed this exercise the selection committee was going to do, I viewed it as if they view Texas Tech favorably, then they might view Maryland favorably as well. And where they ended up in those rankings was number 13. They were the top 4 seed. Now, I want to look back at what they were on Saturday morning, what some of those metrics were for them on Saturday morning here, because they were number 8 in the net, and they were 11, 9, and 9 in the predictive metrics, and they ended up as the number 13 team. So, they got a little bit of a downgrade, but not a ton. And I think that's what you can expect from Maryland. So if you're a Maryland fan, and if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure that you are, what you really want to look for if you're hoping Maryland can get a 3 seed, Maryland can get a 4 seed, is you want to see that net climb into the top 10. I think it's going to be important for Maryland to see that net climb into the top 10. They're at number 14 right now. They have this big win over Wisconsin, that home win over Wisconsin, who's now number 12. Because I think what you're going to see based on what happened with Texas Tech, based on Maryland's non-conference strength of schedule, based on those results-based metrics, you're going to see Maryland get a little bit of a bump down compared to what you might think they were, based on their net ranking. If you just take the net the number 14 team in the country should be a 4 seed. But I think based on what we saw from Texas Tech right now, it's reasonable to assume that Maryland would probably fall closer to that 5 seed range. So for me, if Maryland can get into the top 10 in the net, that would be absolutely huge. That's the show for today. Until next time, this has been the Route 1 Rundown.